Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of the podcast. This week, I was given the wonderful opportunity to be able to talk to Racheal. Now, Racheal specialises in helping you find your PA or VA, in her case, because she is a virtual assistant supplier, more than a personal assistant supplier. And we got to talk a lot about how you systemize and how you really gain those extra systems so you can really scale your business. Now, maybe this is something that you're looking to do because you are in a fortunate position where you can, of course, scale your business, but also this might be something that you can spend some of that available time that we all now seem to have parts of in some ways to start building those systems so that when you're ready and when you're in the ability and the chance to be able to start scaling your business, you're ready, you've got those opportunities, you've got those abilities, and you've got those processes ready to go. So I'm now going to hand over to Racheal, talk a little bit more about what she does, and I hope you take value from this interview, and I'll see you in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Racheal from My Freelance Admin. We are a collective of virtual assistants and skilled freelancers, and we provide businesses with admin support. We work with businesses in different ways, like ad hoc, just one-off tasks, or we offer regular support, and we also have some packages available as well.
Thank you so much for coming on, Racheal. I really appreciate it. And, I've talked to a lot of VAs in the past, and, really quickly, just because people, I think there'll be a percentage of the audience who don't know what a VA is and what they do. Mm-hmm. How do you see what a VA, like what I know we're going to go into a bit more depth, but like at really basic terms, what is the job of a VA?
Yeah. So VA comes from PA, personal assistant, but it's virtual. So it's not someone who's physically there with you. And what we offer is, the reason I say virtual assistant and skilled freelancers is because it's a lot broader than what people assume for a VA. The traditional VA skills: inbox management, calendar management, research, working out your travel, sorting your travel. But realistically, it's the same with a PA, actually. A PA is never just a PA. A PA is everything. When I worked as a PA, I worked for an architecture firm, and I was a PA to the MD, and you were literally like that person's right-hand person, and you would be, doing quotes, you would be dealing with clients, you would be doing such high-level stuff, and you just, you were that person's most reliable staff member, really, if I do say so myself. But anyway, yeah, so what we're talking about with virtual assistants, it's a similar thing. We're there to support businesses. So it could be that you need us to do those things like the inbox management, calendar management. They are the traditional things. But what we offer is much broader, and it's things like setting up your email marketing, it's managing your social media, it's editing your website when you've just got like a few little updates that need doing. It's really quite broad what we offer. It's researching contacts that for you to do outreach to, and then maybe doing that outreach for you. So a VA is not just whenever I say I run a company of virtual assistants, people say, oh, is it, you sit with a headset on and you take calls? And I'm like, no, that's exactly what we don't do. We really don't do that. So yeah, it's quite a wide, broad term, but ultimately admin support.
It's curious to me because I've obviously known about, maybe not obviously, but I've known about VAs for a while, right? Like a very long time. I think the biggest advocate for it was during the pandemic, right? But the way I see it is it's kind of giving your business those like extra hours that you otherwise wouldn't spend, right? Like, so it's taking the person who's a very good tactician or a very good salesperson or a very good marketer or whatever their like traditional really strong skill set is, and kind of removing what I would call the fluff elements of what they need to do, right? So whether that's chasing invoices, whether that's invoicing itself, whether that's specifically, the paper trail stuff, whether that's making sure contracts are signed, making sure contracts go out, etc., 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 or as you say, organising calendars, inboxes, so on, or kind of, I guess in some ways, pre-vetting people who that person is having meetings with, right, as well, I think is an element of it. But I think for me, the reason why, you stood apart specifically in our initial conversation about coming on the podcast was the fact that you focus on processes and systems for a business owner, right? Now, for me, processes and systems is one of the ways you need to build in if you're ever looking to scale a business, full stop, underline, right? Because the thing is, you need a way to tell someone who isn't you, this is how we operate, this is how you film something, this is how you edit something, this is how you get a client, this is how you talk to a client, this is how you would, deal with that client or help deal with that problem if a problem arose, right? How do you go about doing that? And it's a way of, I guess, in some ways, scaling and growing a company. But I think before we go too deep into that, I mean, what would you say to people who, because the reality of the fact is there is a economic challenge for everyone right now in some way or another, right? Whether that's you're looking at it from the perspective of this is a challenge and we're going to rise to it and we're going to get through it and we're going to become stronger because of it, or whether quite literally you're in a very dire financial situation and you're actually questioning, is this business actually for me? It is being a freelancer or being an entrepreneur, what I would describe, and I've had a lot of conversations today about, being whether you're a pure blood entrepreneur or not, e.g. you're in it for the game, you're in it for the actual skill set of obtaining work and the hustle aspect, right? But I think for me, there is an important metric and an important understanding to sort of talk around, which is how does someone firstly understand and kind of deal with the fact that they maybe not be pure blood entrepreneur, what I would describe as a pure blood entrepreneur, and if they're not, is that okay, right? Because I think sometimes, especially when entrepreneurship got made cool during the pandemic and across the last couple of years during the booming recession that we've had, it was kind of this it held this status symbol. It was like, yeah, I run a business and I'm cool, right? Yeah. But I think, I mean, in your journey, or what advice would you give to someone who's like they feel like they are a pure entrepreneur, right? Like they're like, yes, I'm in it for the game. I love the kind of process of finding work and building something for me and that kind of thing. And I'm not necessarily doing it for the status elements to it. I mean, what advice would you give to someone who's looking at, let's be honest, 2 to 3 to maybe 5 years of some interesting economic environments to hopefully sustain but also grow?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So my advice for those kind of people would be to have their ducks in a row now for the next 5 years. We're obviously at quite a low right now, and we're going to bounce back. Surely we're going to bounce back, right? So I would say, you need to be thinking about building towards that future and planning ahead. So by putting those processes in place, for example, of how your company runs, you're ready then to scale, to grow, and you can have some kind of plan on how you're going to do that. One of the things we do, like you mentioned already, is there's a package that I offer personally called Setting Up for Success, which is where we deep dive into admin processes. And I always say that this is like building the foundations of your business, from an admin perspective. And what we do is we deep dive into every step of your client journey. For example, the client inquires, what does that mean for that action? What comes out of that? Is it adding them to a CRM? Is it following them on social media? Is it setting a reminder to follow up with them in a few weeks' time? That's what we do with this package, Setting Up for Success. And we go through and we write down all these processes, and then the client gets that to take away and then implement however they choose to. So what I would say is, while we're having this downtime now, this is the time to be planning and to be prepping. And those processes are really important. I literally shout about them all the time. Process. It's like my favorite word. But, even if you don't use someone like myself, you should be recording those processes. Like every time you do something, you should write down how you're doing it. You're building out this kind of, whatever you want to call it, document of processes, of ways of doing something to secure your future and, and make yourself ready for when we do bounce back.
I think whatever happens with the economy, right, it's going to be the kind of turbulent way there. But I think you're kind of in a situation at the moment where either you have work, which is fantastic and great, which means you maybe don't have time, right? And or you have time. And one of the things that I really found valuable was when I was starting valuing my time in the same way I would value an investment of money, right? So instead of looking at it as an investment of time, it's okay, what's my return on the time I'm spending on this task, whatever it may be. And something, that personally I'm dyslexic, and I've spoken at lengths about dyslexia and so on. But the reason why I mention it here is because I think it's important that you mentioned about documenting what your processes are. And for people who are either bilingual, e.g. English is not their first language, and or they find writing challenging, or they have dyslexia, or etc., another way to do it, and a way of, to be honest, I will probably end up doing all of my processes and have done previously, is actually just recording videos or recording myself doing things that then I can give to someone like yourself and say, okay, well, can we create this into a nice shiny document that I can give to people, right? Because I have zero interest in writing. I can do it, but it takes me longer, and so on and so on and so on. But also, It's about creating something that's actually going to help the person that's going to consume it, because sometimes they might be a different way of learning, right? Like for me, I would very easily and rather watch a video than sit here and read a document, right? Unless I have to, of course, right? And I think it's an important thing to interject before we go into processes and so on, because I think sometimes traditionally it was very, you have to write a document, you have to have a folder. But I think nowadays we're going to be or in the next couple of years, 10 years, 15 years, we're going to be in a world where actually it's a bit more fluid, and it's a bit more, actually there's an option to have it as a video. Actually, there's an option to have an audio version. Actually, there's an option to have a written form. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting. I mean, how have you seen that in your own process, either for your own business or when you're working with clients as well, that maybe not all of them traditionally are like, right, we're going to write a document?
Yes, definitely. So we use Loom a lot. And one of my clients in particular, literally every process has like a Loom attached to it, which everyone with the team that I provide for her use all the time, which is really useful. And then, yeah, it's sure in my business too, I use Loom. With our clients, sometimes like when we're doing that package in particular, usually it's a conversation and it's like them just talking at me and me writing things down. But other ways we've done it is voice notes. So, if we're working with a client regularly and they want to record a process or anything really, they can just record a voice note and send it to VA, and then they can process it from there and do whatever's needed. So there's several different ways of working. It doesn't have to be you're sat at your screen typing. It doesn't, there's so many, we're so lucky now, aren't we, that we do have so many different ways of working, and it can suit different, like you say, different types of learning and things like that, and different,
I mean, I
people.
also think there's a level of in some respects, recording a video or doing it as a voice note is actually going to be more efficient in regards to time, like looking back to that time investment reality. And or if we're having a conversation here and we were going down my processes, I could tell you every single process in half an hour or 40 minutes or whatever that we use on a day-to-day basis. If you asked me to write that, it would take me 6 hours, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not a good use of time investment, right? Now, of course, there's a balance and a metric when it comes to, okay, you connect money and time, and then you'll combine, what's the return on that? But I think the thing that I keep saying to people at the moment, especially as we looked at the start of this economic challenge, was the ones that are going to be fine are the ones who are good operators, whatever that means for you, right? So does that mean, okay, you understand the situation you're in, where it's actually, I am going to be potentially caught off a bit short this month in regards to cash flow. Okay, so I'm aware of that in 2 weeks or a week or a month or whatever it is, I've got to make some bill payments. Okay, cool. Right, so what can I do now that means I'm not screwed, right? Or I'm not in a challenging situation. And I think that's the bit when it comes to operational, it's that instinctive challenge, I think. I mean, I guess the question there is, if you have an instinctive set of challenges or an instinctive belief system or whatever it may be to grow your business, how did that come across? Because I think for me, a lot of people when they start out, they see people like us perhaps that are very right, I'm doing this, I'm very busy, I've got this to do, I've got this to do. And they're just I don't even know where to begin. So they end up not doing anything because they just get overwhelmed, and they get kind of I could do this, or oh my God, I've got to do marketing, oh my God, I've got to do sales, oh my God, I've got to do comms, I've got to do admin, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to right. And they end up just sort of melting down and not really doing anything. So what advice would you give to people who are either trying to develop that instinctive based kind of okay, at this point I should go hard on sales, or at this point I need to push marketing, or at this point I need to kind of think about this, or I need to think about my processes?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that one of the things I say a lot as well is you don't have to be everything. You don't have to be the VA of your company, is what I often say. So when you're starting a business, you don't have to do every single bit of it. You should be the, whatever you want to call yourself, the company director, the founder. When I started this business, so prior to this business, I always worked for people, and I was always I did everything. I love to do everything, and really I was really driven, and I still am really driven, but I wanted to do every single detail. When I started this business, something clicked and something changed, and I don't know why, I don't know what happened, but I just handed it all over. And I just literally, the VAs I had when I started, which was only in January this year, so 10 months ago, I got them to do my branding. I got them to build my website. I got them to manage my bookkeeping, and I literally handed over everything from the start, which obviously is quite a big financial thing to do. Like I am, I wouldn't say everyone do that, because you need to sort of build as your business builds. But I found from handing over that stuff, it made what was produced was completely different to what I would do, but in a really good way. And it meant I could then concentrate on growing the business. And I really don't think my business would be as busy as it is now. Like if I hadn't have done that, I think I'd still be building my website. Do you know what I mean? I'd still be in really early stages. Whereas actually what happened was by February, I was having to recruit more VAs. And then things would just tumbling. And by August, I did another round of recruitment. So I would really advise, having outsourcing and getting support, and not thinking you have to do everything. That was my first point. What was my second point? I've forgotten it already.
Just while you're thinking about that, I think it's an important point to make. But I think there's kind of like two approaches that I would take there, right? Which is, number one, you become a tacticianer and everything, and you just work bloody hard, right? Like using a time relationship thing where it's like return on time. Just invest a significant amount of time. And I don't mean like short-term significant. I mean a lot of hours for a lot of period of time for extended period of time, right? And even when you have outsourced stuff, that still means you have to continue with that process and still investing time and energy and resources. Actually, the more you scale, the more you have to invest, arguably, right? But personally, I think there's two approaches. One is like semi-low risk, but it's like you are the deciding factor. The other is slightly higher risk, which is what you're referring to, which is basically bringing in hired help from the beginning, which is great as long as you can basically find a way to bankroll it, right? Yeah. The challenge can come, and the reason why I always suggest to people, especially if it's their first business and they don't have a lot of operational experience, which is the key bit we mentioned earlier, is you just have to do everything and you need to learn how to do it well. Because if I can be a okay designer, and I can be an okay video editor, and I can be an okay camera operator, and I can be an okay salesperson, an okay marketer, then I can decide and get a taste for, actually, I really enjoy marketing my own business. Actually, I really enjoy being in content. Actually, I really enjoy this process and this process. But there's also going to be processes that you're like, oh God, I got to invoice again. Oh God, I got to do admin. Oh God, etc. Right? And that's why I think it becomes really important, because then you can make a hierarchy and say, okay, the first person I'm going to bring in to help is going to be with this, this, and this, because I don't enjoy it. It's really boring, or it's not a good use of my time, I think is the key there, right? And I think that for me, it's about choosing how you pick that person.
Yeah, definitely. And I've learned that through finding the VAs for my business, that not everyone who comes along is the right person for what I want. I want someone who's going to do the job that I would do, that be as hardworking and as detailed as I would personally do. Yeah, I would say maybe a trial period or something like that. The way I work with the VAs basically is I have different levels of interviews, and there's like a written form that they fill out. Then they send me their CV. Then we have a call. And then I actually do like a trial period with them, and they actually do internal work for my business for like 2 weeks or something. I give them tasks so I can see how they work. And that's a really good way of me knowing if I want to continue with them and then put them in front of clients. Because there have been people who I've just found are not suitable. Mostly it's down to communication more than anything, not necessarily skill, but I want someone to communicate, really well, and reply to messages frequently. I know they're juggling clients, but by the end of the day, I want to hear back. But yeah, in terms of advice to other people, I would say, just get to know the VA, maybe talk to a few different ones. Like if you were coming to my company and you needed a regular VA, we'd first of all present you with some I'd talk to you about who you wanted, what you wanted. Then I would think about who I've got and who would be suitable. I'd put forward a few, you'd see their profiles, and then if you choose who you'd want to have a call with, a free call, just to get to know them really, and then you'd proceed. And like with a company like mine, if that person wasn't right, then there's someone else I can put forward. Whereas if you're going for like an individual VA, then that's a bit more difficult. But I would say, really get to know that person and think about the questions, think about your values, and ask them about their values and see if there's a match there, because that's quite key.
I think it kind of like aligns with like when you work with clients as well, right? Like even broader, right? Like when we look for clients, like I've turned down jobs that are significant size of sums of money, right? To do video work. Like there's no, everyone understands specifically that productions can go to significant size of sums of money, right, to be done. But the thing is, for me, I've turned some jobs like that down because the morals or the people or we don't synergize. It's nothing against the people sometimes, actually. It's simply to do with the fact that I will want to take this approach and they just won't. And that's we're never going to be able to collaborate in the right way in that respect. It should be a fun and easy experience. I had a pre-production meeting this morning, and the amount of laughter inside that pre-production meeting proved to me that the people we were working with were all the right people around the table. Because if you're able to actually talk like seriously, but also in a kind of like, this is the ideas, but this is like kind of loose and we're kind of throwing ideas around, but it's all respectful, it becomes really powerful, because then you're all focused on the job at hand instead of thinking, and there's no kind of like, I guess in some ways the question there is like on the trust element of it, right? Like it's like, yeah, of course you can have all the systems and the contracts and the invoices in place to make sure you're not screwed in some way. But at the end of the day, you have to trust the client beyond those legal, because the legal things are there to protect both parties, right? That's the only reason why they exist. But at the end of the day, if you don't trust the person anyway, then you're not going to really want to work with them in the first place, because you're not, if it has to get to the point where some of the times like some of the times for certain size projects, for example, we will make sure everything's legally 100% locked in, so that whatever happens, it's not about trust, it's because we're talking about very sizable sums of money, and if this goes wrong, I'm very screwed, right? But that's different to, oh, this is a job, but it's like we're not talking about large sums of money, or it's like the crew isn't huge or whatever. My costs on the job are barely anything. And actually, it's just like, this is a really nice project. And actually, this really aligns with who we are as a business, what we are doing. And, the one I was talking about this morning is exactly that. It would fit into that profile, and it would, and, I think partly the reason why we won the bid on it was because of the brand values that we hold. And I think sometimes people misunderstand, and the conversations I've been having a lot on the podcast at the moment is the between creating transactional content or investing in a transactional thing, which I would actually argue you're probably closer to in respect to potentially, right? You could be seen or perceived as a transactional investment, e.g. you're helping me gain more transactions quickly, and or a brand investment. And I think for me, it's an interesting conversation. I think it really, like, what's the best decision for that company or for you as a business owner, if you're listening to this, would be understand where you are, understand what your reality is. As I said earlier, do you need to be in a position where you need to generate cash flow? Are you in a position where you need to actually get out of a financial hole potentially, right? Are you in the position where actually you need to cut your costs and bring your costs down so you can make larger profit margin to, as I say, get yourself out of that hole? But I think the question is, like, when you're not in that situation, how do you personally, or you've seen with clients, balance the kind of brand building elements that I think every business should do, but also having a level of transactional kind of investment? Because I think the ones who, and the businesses who are able to ride this line the best are going to be the ones who are actually going to be able to thrive even during this challenging period that we're going to go into.
Yeah, well, first of all, the brand values thing is really, really important. And actually, I found that really important even when I was an employee of someone. I realized my values, were not the same as their values. And then I was like, what is this friction between us? And I realized that certain things I really, really value and they didn't, and I disagreed with it. In my business so far, I haven't had any clashes in values with clients. It's all been very nice so far, but we're quite new. But I think also, we're like supporting businesses. I can imagine from a creative point of view, when you're working with someone, those values really need to be aligned, because the creativity won't come. But from my point of view, when we're supporting businesses, yes, it is very important, but it's not been such a showstopper. There haven't been any clashes so far. One thing I mentioned to you, I'm not sure if I told you, but I also work as a singer, so I'm from that creative background as well. So I do kind of understand the creative, working with someone as a creative, and I can totally see how that's like really valuable to make sure you're all the right team
Yeah,
working
and I think,
together.
I think this is why, like, especially in the creative fields, it's important to have a quite extensive freelance network or network of people around you, right? Because there'll be certain people who are like, actually, these guy, these girls, these people, incredibly good fits for this job. There might be a job that comes across my desk next week or today that's like, these people aren't the best for that. And if I don't have the people that can actually go, yeah, I'm going to put the right people on the job from a value, but also from a cost and also etc. point of view, and also from just a quality to a level of quality of work perspective as well, I think it's about understanding why that is and then what they fit into, right? So are they a specialist in a specific area of video, right? Are they a specific, great person with lighting? Okay, so when I need a specific lighting specialist, they're the people I'll go to. Or is something really complicated from an audio filming point of view? Okay, so I've got people who are really, really good at audio, like complicated audio filming. Okay, great, fantastic. So what I'm doing now is I'm slowly building this team of people who have tiers of experts, right? I've got people who are really good at all rounding and are very good at problem solving on set, which is incredibly valuable. But then also I've got people who are like really, really high end specialist in, as I say, lighting, sound, cinematography, directing, etc. And it's one of those things where you can then bring them into projects where it makes sense. Number one, where you've got the money to do so, but also number two, where it makes sense for the story you're trying to tell. And I think for every business, they should treat it the same way, because I think traditionally, as solo entrepreneurs as well, we sometimes get into this habit of, I have to do everything and I have to have the control. Because I know for me, for a long time, that's what I had the issue with. And I was like, no, I can't be done to my standard. I can't possibly put my seal of approval on this if it's not done by me. If I don't film it, if I don't edit it, if I don't produce it. But actually, yes, you can. Right, and this kind of brings up the question, I guess, in some ways, of how and why processes are so important. Because in the creative field, it's harder, right? Because you all have different creative visions or different creative realities. But actually, you can still build systems and processes within that creative world and in that system. But just talking like really figuratively, how do you start creating a process for a client, whether that's you directly or someone that you are one of your VAs, for example?
Yeah, so it always starts with this session, like this it's over Zoom session, although I have done it in person twice just because they were local. And it's just like a brain dump from them of, they just tell me about their business, they tell me, and then I ask the questions like, okay, so what happens then? And what happens then? And then I gradually build the processes. It might be that the ones they have in place are not clear. I mean, a lot of the times when people come to me for that package, it's because they want processes in place. Like one I did recently, it was a solo entrepreneur, and he grown his business over years, and he'd always done everything, and he just got to the point where he worked out he'd lost something like £126,000 of work because he didn't have time to say yes to it, didn't have time to do it, or didn't, and he just needed to work more efficiently. So with him, we literally just discussed everything. He told me how he did things, and then I could see, this is how we can improve that. This is a good way to do it. That's how it works. And then I've done another one where the client actually knew, it was a bit like what you said, they knew the processes, they knew exactly what they wanted, they just needed it documented. But even with that one, I could still see areas to improve it and make suggestions. So it always starts with a conversation, which is usually quite detailed, and I minute everything, and then they get a copy of the minutes in full, so they get quite a lot of content from it.
I think there's an opportunity as well, right? Like when you're creating marketing collateral or you're creating an educational piece, like actually this could be in theory multi-purpose, right? Because let's be honest, systems are systems at the end of the day, right? Like you do this thing, you do this thing, you do this thing, you do this thing, this outcome happens. Right?
They're like my passion. Don't
right.
say
they're just systems. Right?
They're like they're the best thing in the world.
But you know what I mean, right? Like eventually, it's do this, do this, do this, do this. You get this outcome, right? But I think for me, like especially as people like, let's say for example, I'm being looked up to as a media production professional, right? Sure, okay. So people who are say 3 years behind me, they might find actually what systems I use and how I use them and my processes, as in my process of creating, but also my process of running a business, really valuable. So, and I don't know whether this is something you thought about, but it for me as a marketer, it screams opportunity, right? Because going through this process is a great way to, number one, create a lot of marketing collateral that actually proves that you know what you're talking about, number one. Number two, it also kind of pre-qualifies your clients, because let's say we're doing a client journey. Okay, so potentially I get an inquiry in, it comes in, then what happens? Okay, cool, then this happens, okay, then we expect this, okay, cool, then we have this. And what you're doing is you're basically saying to clients, this is the journey you're going to go on before they have to go on it, right? And that way they're, number one, familiar, but also number two, they're in a position where if they don't, if they, like, for example, we will never quote a job before I have a call with the client. That's just something we don't do, right? So if it's a client that's just like, yeah, we want a quote, but we're not going to give you the time to have a call, then sorry, but don't reach out to me. In the nicest way possible, don't, because it's a waste of everyone's time. Because to me, I need to know, unless the only asterisk on this is if you give me a very detailed brief. But even then, actually that warrants a call even more, because there's going to be things I want to clarify on the brief that have a knock-on effect to the quote that I'm going to give, right? I mean, how do you, I guess in some ways, how do you, could you be an advisor in that respect as well? Because I think there is crossover, as I say, with like, hey, you should use marketing, or hey, you could use this process and actually move this process over to somewhere else. So let's say I build an editing process, but actually the fundamental parts of an editing process is probably very similar to how I take on clients, and probably very similar to how I take on new staff, or etc. So how do you, I guess in some ways, do you build, and this is going to get very septic-y, but do you build processes for the process?
Yeah. So first of all, one thing I should have mentioned is before they do this session, there is like a form that they fill out, and it takes them through lots of different questions that help me then go into the session, know what to ask. And it also gives me a lot of information in advance as well, so I can be prepared and help advise them. But yeah, it basically, I said we start through the client journey. It doesn't mean that that's all we do. From every like bit of that client journey, there's like 10 offshoots of different things. So there tends to be, like you say, the process for the process. And it's like a big web, which I love, a big spider web, like a big web of information. But yeah, there's a definite process to how I do it. And yeah, it works really well, and helps just bring some clarity to like how they work.
What would you say to people who, let's be honest, if you're going to do this, you're committing financial resources for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, if you're doing it properly, right? What would you say to people who, like, number one, like what jumped to mind was when you say a web of processes, people are going to go, oh my God, that's really overwhelming, right? Number one. So I guess what's the advice of people who are overwhelmed, who maybe have the money but just don't know where to begin, or don't know how to like get over that overwhelm? But also number two, is there anything that you would suggest that puts, like, let's say I look at my growth plan and I go, right, in 2 years or in a year, I'm definitely going to use someone like yourself, right? Is there any pre-work I can personally do in regards to trading time instead of trading money that can still move my forward and potentially might actually get me there within a year instead of 18 months? That I can do now? Because I think there's kind of like, there's some stuff which, it's all personal preference of course, but I think there's some stuff that is kind of, I don't want to say like is obvious, but it is kind of obvious in regards to the process, right? You go through this, you go through this, you go through this. Like if you've served one client, there was a process from conversation beginning to job being obtained, right? So surely you can look at that and go, okay, how do I sort of systematize this, or how can I optimize that in that respect? But I guess let's focus on the overwhelm first part of that question, which is like, how does someone, because for me, as someone who's like looking to build a lot of processes quickly, that's just like, okay, let's just get it done. It's just going to take time and energy. But for people who maybe don't have that kind of gung-ho-esque approach that I would have, what would you suggest to people who actually get started that are like, yeah, I'm not going to do it because that's terrifying and it's really overwhelming?
Yeah, well, so I have had this before, obviously, with the overwhelm side of it. So what I tend to suggest then is like, I need to do that session with you, because at the moment, generally I'm working with really small businesses or solo entrepreneurs. So I need to have that session with you to get that information. And then what I would suggest is that we put an online business manager, which is like a virtual assistant, but it's more of a managerial role in place to bring those processes to life. So they would then take that information, and then each week they'd work with you. They could just do like an hour or two a week. It depends how quickly you want it to work, to basically build on those processes, put them in place. I don't know, it depends on the client, but like ones I've done before, they've had like a team, they've gone off and put a team together, or a couple of VAs together, one for marketing and one for more the finance side, and actually then the marketing one did more administration stuff as well. And then the OBM, the online business manager, would oversee that, make sure the processes are in place and are building and evolving. So it doesn't have to be you, is what I'm trying to say. So I need you for that initial bit, and then it can be handed over to someone else. And then the second question was...
well, it was around people who have like more, because like, for me, I would just sit there and go, right, let's get it done. I don't particularly care how, let's just get it done, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm very gung-ho-esque. But for people as a starting point who aren't gung-ho, as in, right, okay, we've had the call, right? Maybe they want to hand it over to themselves because they maybe don't have the finance to fund it, or they maybe are not willing to take the risk right now, or for a combination of factors that's like, hey, I can't really pay you on a retainer or whatever that it would cost to actually work with you in the way you just described, which is of course amazing and has its own benefits, I'm sure. But for people who are looking to trade time, because these are all the resources we have at the beginning, is time or money, right? And as we grow our business, we lose a lot of time, but we gain some money, which means we're just balancing these resources. But for people who have more time than necessarily money, so they're money poor, not meaning poor, but as in money poor in regards to what they can spend, but time rich, as in they've got a lot of time, and as a kind of a starting point, I guess, to someone who then would be really valuable that comes in like a year, what would you suggest they actually do to kind of build the plan, I guess, or build the starting blocks for someone like yourself to then build on top?
Yeah, sure. So let's assume they're going to not necessarily do my setting up for success package, but they want to build that by themselves. What I would suggest is, over time, like, write everything down, dictate or document however you feel comfortable, but like, just spend those if you've got time, spend those extra few minutes. So I'm doing a task today, like yesterday I did, on the 23rd of every month I do my invoices. So yesterday I did my invoicing, and like the first time I did it, I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? And then the next month I was like, how do I do it? And it wasn't until I sat down and actually wrote down that process. Now I literally just log on, follow the process step by step, and it takes like no time at all to do it, so that's what I mean. Just take that time to write, just stop and write stuff down. How do you actually do something? And actually then think about it. Is that the best way to do it? Should it be slightly, can you do it better or quicker in a different way? So if you are time rich, spend that time now investing in thoughts, stopping, thinking. The other thing I was going to say was, if you were to do a session like what I've talked about, and then you don't necessarily have the resources to implement it, but you have the time, then you can be the one, like, those processes are useful to you. They're not just for a team, they're actually useful for you. And it's really useful to like I say, document how you do something, and like totally understand and be really clear about how something works. So you are like not wasting time trying to remember how to do things or faffing around.
I mean, what jumped to mind just as you're talking there was like how I learned to get really fast at editing. Because one of the things that those who don't know me specifically, but one of the things I'm known for is my event turnaround time, where it's needed and where it's paid for, right? I can arguably out edit most people. But the only reason why I can do that is because I've documented the process of what it takes for me to go from shooting a video to having a final deliverable, and firstly, writing down and understanding. And the first thing I actually did was film myself edit, right? So I filmed my screen when I was editing. So then I watched, and then I took an hour or half an hour or whatever it was, and I sat down and went, right, what am I doing inefficiently here? What is inefficient? Why am I doing less here? Why am I color grading now? Why am I adding these? Why am I adding these? Because the thing is, like with a lot of like specifically in video production, there's some effects and stuff that's just going to really be processor intensive for your computer. You always should do those at the end, because you're just slowing everything else down if you're not working in an optimal way, right? And the thing is, once you start this process, it becomes kind of a little bit of addictive, because you're able to shave off, like, okay, it might be 2 seconds per action. Okay. But across a 5-hour edit, that's half an hour or 45 minutes, right? So suddenly a 5-hour edit isn't a 5-hour edit. It's 4 hours and 15 minutes, or maybe 4 hours, right? Okay, so now can I get it down to 3 hours? Now, it's careful that you don't sacrifice quality by doing this, but the reason why I think personally writing down your process or filming your process or whatever, however you choose to document it, is important, is it allows you to pick apart the, why do I do that?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. Why is that there? Right? That bit. That moment where you're like, why am I doing it this way round when I'm going to go back and do that check anyway? So just remove that bit and that bit. So then I can go that. I mean, I guess in some ways it's part of your role, even when you work with clients longer term, to potentially see what they can't.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's definitely, looking from the outside into a business is very different to being in a business. It's a yeah. But yeah, like you just said, the amount of times I've done something, over and over, and you make the same mistake each time. You go, oh, I must remember to not do that next time. I need to do this bit before that bit. But if you don't write it down, you don't remember, and then your brain just goes into like automatic mode and you do it exactly the same thing. So same way the next time. So yeah, it's so important to acknowledge, how something should be done, the way it should be done, and document it so you can follow it.
Sometimes, especially when we're trying to optimize what we're doing, it's uncomfortable to do the things that we know are more efficient, even when we've analyzed it. But the thing is that people need to appreciate that maybe listening to this, it takes about 21 days or so to build a habit, right? So if you've done something for years in a specific way, so let's say I have really lazy editing techniques, right, that aren't very efficient, I'm still going to feel comfortable doing those because I've done them for years. But the second I decide to do it optimally, it's going to feel really weird and really kind of like this feels like a new muscle that I'm training again, right? But the power is the second you get beyond day 20 of doing it, or time 20 of doing it, because then it becomes the norm. It becomes the traditional thing. And and I see this a lot, and there's this kind of debate around editors quite a lot of the time when it comes to video editors, because everyone has a editor they started with, right? And in most cases you stay with that editor for most of your career. And for me, that's an efficiency point of view, because yes, I could learn another program, yes, I could do this, yes, I could do that, and there's benefits to all of them. But at the end of the day, what gets the job done, right? Yeah. And how effectively and how efficiently is it going to take me to get on the same par with that other piece of software? And how much extra value or what are the pros that I gain from being multi-skilled? And how much extra time do I have to keep bouncing between the platforms to be skilled? Because there's some things, especially in editors, but I'm sure all the same is true in processes or admin or whatever you're doing, where it's like, this program doesn't operate in the same way this program does. So it's like the things you can do here that aren't the same over here. So it's actually, and sometimes you're actually having to spread yourself slightly too thin sometimes, and actually maybe it'd be better to just bring in an expert if you need that extra editor. Or, if you've got the budget to bring a colorist in, then okay, then just don't do the color work yourself, for example, right? And I think that's the important thing that I think anyone should take from this conversation. I'm aware of times I think this will wrap up soon, but the final thing I was going to say was something that you mentioned a little bit earlier on, which was get to the point as soon as you can where you can bring people in to support you so that you can focus on the bits that either you're really good at or you enjoy, or both. Ideally both, because then it's easier because you're actually enjoying the process, and an entrepreneurship gurus will always talk about enjoying the process over, enjoy the grind, and I'm all for that within reason. But also there's a certain level of stuff of like, if I hate writing documents, I'm still going to hate writing documents no matter how many times I do it, right?
Totally, yeah.
So perhaps a good investment of time and energy and resources is I go and do something that makes more money, and then I pay someone to write documents for me.
That is my way of thinking, yes.
Right, and I think sometimes there's so much. Again, I think the hurdles that people stop doing that is, number one, how much it's going to cost. Number two, is it going to be to the same quality, and or do I want to give up control? Or number three, can it be done to the values and the standards which I feel it's going to require be? And the reality of the fact is, if you build these systems and these processes to basically bring it to yourself every time towards it before it goes to the client, then there's no problem, right? If you QA everything, or if you quality assure everything, what's the problem? Because you can send it back into the system again at the top and go, this is not good enough, bring it back to me when it is, right? And that'll take you maybe 5 minutes, right? And say, actually, can we make this tweak, or etc. It's about being respectful when you do that, of course. But at the end of the day, you know what you're looking for, and especially if you're more experienced in whatever. And this is why I always suggest people start by learning everything, because if you're going to bring someone who's better than you, you need to know it well enough so you can choose and understand completely whether what they're giving you is actually any good, right? The issue with when people just do stuff they don't really understand is you have a yardstick. You can't tell whether it's any good or not, right? Because I don't know how a good, like, if I don't know what a good document is, how can I tell you whether you've written a good document? I can't. So that's personally what I would say. I mean, that's kind of everything I wanted to cover, but at the end I like to give the guest an opportunity to either ask me a question, throw in a topic for us to discuss, or etc. I mean, is there anything? It's not a trick question, but is there anything?
Okay, I'm just going to go rogue and ask you, I don't know if this is the kind of thing you meant, but I want to ask you, what's your favorite type of project to work on?
It's funny, there's lots of ways I could take that answer. What I would say is there's not a specific project that I've done for a client that's specific, like, because we're in the lucky position where we kind of take only on the stuff we really want to do. But what I would say is, in answer to the question, like, what's my favorite, like, operational activity for me as a business owner, is actually doing stuff like this, either marketing the business or having conversations with people or actually being the face of the brand. Because so many people say to me, what's it like being a public figure, and you put so much publicly, and doesn't that worry you? And I'm like, yeah, but you need to remember that you're in control of that information. You're in control of what goes public. You're in control of that, right? Like, there's certain things that I don't talk about. There's lots of things I don't talk about, and there's lots of things I will never talk about publicly, right? That doesn't stop me being a public figure. That doesn't stop me being public facing. It's about understanding and being appreciative of the things I'm going to talk about publicly and the things I'm not going to talk about publicly. People think that they have to share everything. Yeah. You don't. You choose what you share, and you personally have control over that. Personally, from what I've found, and I think, especially when it comes to like family and kids and stuff, and relationships and stuff, you don't have to make that known if you don't want to. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, that's completely in your control. I think sometimes people misappreciate or misunderstand the power that they hold over the information. Because you don't have any idea how well my business is doing because you can't see my books. You have no idea whether I'm in a relationship or not because you can't see what happens outside of work. Right? So you only know if I tell you. Right? Like, you don't see access to my emails. So how do you know what conversations have been had? Right? Yeah. So someone who's skeptical of it or worried about becoming a public figure, that's what I would say to them, because I hope that answers your question, but that's what I would say, because I think there's so many people who could be and should be, because it would be hugely valuable for their business, but they don't because they're worried about, oh, I don't want to let on that I'm a mum, or I don't want to let on that I have kids, or I don't want to let on that I have a partner, or I don't want to let on that I have a person. It's like, for me, I can see them as two separate things.
Yeah. I know this is completely random, but do you remember Pop Idol back in the day? I think whichever show it was that Hearsay came out of, and Kim Marsh was on there, and she had this big reveal, and she was crying because she had to admit that she had children. And now at the time of filming this, she's on Strictly, and her kids are like 20 something. But I was just like, what a difference in life, that back then, 20 years ago, she felt she had to hide that. But now, you'd embrace that if she was like trying to be a singer and a mother. But you're right, yeah. In terms of what we're doing and businesses, and you don't have to. You don't have to share everything. I mean, I'm thinking on big celebrity level, you don't get as much choice because the paps are at your door.
Yeah, but you still choose what you react to. Right, you can't stop them taking photos as you walk out the door. You can't, so on, and that's a problem for society to decide on whether that's a good moral question or not. But what I'm talking about here is, like, people say to me, "Oh, what if people take clips out of context?" Or what if people like? I don't say anything in content that I wouldn't say to people's faces or wouldn't say publicly. But that's because I'm integral to myself, and in the nicest way possible. If you don't like it, I'll have a debate with you, respectful debate, but I don't really mind if you don't like it. I'm not saying it to get your approval. I'm saying it because I'm trying to articulate my views on the world and how I see potentially moving forward, whether that's through business or in general, in that respect. And I think it's important to establish why you care about others' judgment of what you say, and or that the fact that whether they twist it or not is not actually going to matter that much unless you let it. matter, if that makes sense. Because, you know, like people say to me all the time, oh, how do you deal with hate comments? I'm like, well, you choose how you deal with them. Either you say, okay, I get your valid criticism, or why is this person calling me a name, or why is this person commenting on my hat or my how I wear or what I'm talking about, or etc. And then you can choose how to react with that. Either you can react emotionally, which I wouldn't recommend, or you can just say, look, you know, I had it the other day where someone was alleging something like, oh, this guy looks like this. I'm like, well, I can promise you that's not going to happen, right? It's just some guy on the internet. It doesn't mean much, or guy or girl on the internet, should I say. And it's not, you know, it's not that big of a deal unless you make it a big deal. It's the question of, are you going to give it the power, right? Like, I'll give you a really quick example. Has my boss made... Oh, my boss has made me really angry. Has he? Or have you decided you're going to give them the power to make...
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what? It relates totally back to what we were talking about earlier with your values. If you're clear on your values and you're strong with your values, then all that other stuff doesn't matter. It's like a wall, you know. These are my values. This is who I am. Bam. Don't care what you say.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and I think there's a different line between like, I don't care what you say, and we're gonna have a debate around like difference of opinion respectfully, right? But I think for me, especially when you're very focused on driving a business, and as a final thought, and what I'd recommend for people to focus on is choose what you know you're good at and what you know you're gonna be really transactionally good at and what's gonna actually generate you revenue right now, and focus on that. So if that's marketing, or that's sales, that's cold, or that's building relationships, or whatever it is, or having conversations, then just double down on that. Just focus on that. And I think that, you know, for me, that's why it's important. I think that's why it's really powerful. And that's why I always keep saying to people, and in content and outside content, saying, look, you've got to become a really, really good operator right now. And if you're not a good operator, that's okay. But work on the fact that you need to be a good operator, because the people who are going to actually survive and probably even thrive during this economic downturn, because the reality of the fact is, look, everything that happens economically, there's opportunities if you're willing to actually grab them and or put yourself in a position where you can be in the way of them, right? I think they're the kind of two main things I've really learned from the years I've been in business. But you have to be ready when the opportunity arises, and this is what I mean by good operation. But for those who are like interested in this conversation, or they may want to reach out to you to have a private conversation, or they may potentially want to work with you, I mean, where's best for people to continue to have this conversation outside of this piece of content?
So my website is www.myfreelanceadmin.com, or on social media, Instagram, Facebook, link, or find me on LinkedIn. So yeah, love to continue this conversation.
Thank you for coming back, ladies and gents. I hope you took value from that episode and took value from that conversation. Thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me. If you are new to the channel, why not please subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode, which is going to be another exciting conversation where hopefully you'll be able to gain some more value about how to move your business forward, even though we're looking at some challenging times. I'm going to be here to help support that in your content journey and see how you can up your content to really still allow you to connect with your ideal clients, still allow you to showcase you and your business and what you do as well. And if you'd like to hear how video can help your business in 2022, then make sure to find my information somewhere around this video, and I'll see you very, very soon.